Tom LoBianco, editor, co-founder, 24 Site News, joined today by Mike Madrid. If you don't know already, Mike Madrid is a co-founder of the Lincoln Project, also a longtime expert on Latino voting trends, and a little bit going on with that. So, Mike, thanks for being here, man.
It's so good to be with you. So impressed by what you're building here. Thanks for letting me into the community. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. You had a really good piece recently. Let me pull this up here.
Yeah.
I was actually just reading it before we came on. Guys, if you don't already, make sure to go over to after you hit the subscribe button there at the top. Head on over to The Great Transformation with Mike Madrid on Substack. Okay, and his latest piece is the Latino vote reality check with some really good. I think this is data from Pew. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
So what does that tell us?
So Pew Research is the gold standard as it relates to kind of election analysis and data. They've been doing it for 30 years. They've been doing it longer than anybody. Catalyst
Yeah.
is great too. Don't want to take anything away from Catalyst.
Hmm.
But Pew's been doing it a little bit longer, and they've got really, really good data, a longer trend line as a result of things about like how minority voters vote. And they released a very big national finding with the final numbers on the 2024 election, found something interesting, concerning, something that I had, been raising flags about, which was this rightward shift that was happening, was actually a little bit bigger than the exit polls were saying.
Interesting.
Trump actually got 48% of the Hispanic votes to Kamala
Wow.
Harris's 51. Now we've kind of been going over why that's happened. I've written extensively on it. People have been pontificating on it. But here's one of the reason I wrote this piece was because tactically what I'm concerned about is Democrats have always looked at investing on the ground to do massive get out the vote operations in heavily Hispanic dense precincts. That strategy is not going to work anymore. They're probably turning out a lot of Trump voters when they're doing that. And that's a really, really significant shift in Democratic, perspectives on who Latino voters are, because you can't win races like that anymore. And so, look, I'm not suggesting that there won't be a snap back of Latino voters in the midterms. I believe there will be, Tom. But I also want to make it clear, this is part of a longer-term trajectory that the Democrats have to get their heads around by saying Latino voters are probably fundamentally different than they ever have been for us, and we're going to have to make some really serious strategic and tactical adjustments.
Yeah, I was reading that, and you point out there that 2018 there was a surge in the midterms for Democrats, but obviously
Right.
did not hold.
And that's Tom. That's why I wrote the piece. Is the real danger is, and both sides do this. This is just politics. Is when you win, it's kind of like what happened in the New York City mayor's race, right? If your side wins, well, then you look like a genius, and everybody's wrong, and we're right, and we got a mandate to do whatever we want. And then you start to believe that, and then the other side corrects, and then they're a genius. They got it right. They have a mandate, and on and on and on. In 2018 is a very important year. I want to bring this up because people don't remember, but in that first Trump midterm, what happened was there were ICE raids. Remember, Trump was cracking down too, not to the same extent, but he would remember the caravans coming on Fox News. And
that's
all the
right.
ICE raids in Los Angeles, right? And what happened was the Latino community did come back to the Democrats. A historically high turnout in the midterms. Never had a higher turnout in midterm history. Decidedly anti-Republican.
Yeah.
But in 2020, 2 years later, 8% rightward shift to Donald Trump. That stayed in the blue wave election in the midterms, and then a massive further rightward shift in 2024. So my fear is that the Democrats will start to believe that immigration will have brought back all of these voters, and that maybe there's this weird Trump bump in the middle of this. What I'm trying to raise flags about is saying, guys, there's a decades-long trend that is breaking away from you, and you almost lost it this time for the first time in American history. Got to make sure you make the adjustments.
There's a, and we've talked about this. So we actually have not talked since before the election. So,
Right.
I mean,
I got to get on more regularly. We got to do this more often.
Yes, we do, man. We got to crack out the chicharrones and some aguila and
go at it. It's been a long time.
Seriously, man. And you kind of, we talked a little bit about this last time about, broadly speaking, Latinos, and this is not a it's I feel like we use this term, the same way we refer to, religious voters. Well, there's all kinds of religions. I mean, there's Mexican Americans, there are capital L Latinos,
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
down where you're at right now in Miami.
yep.
Um, and I think a lot of people miss the cultural conservatism that is native, especially to folks from Central America and Latin America, the old Gran Panama, as
Right.
it, Gran Colombia. I'm sorry, including Panama and Venezuela. Um, and I feel like we talked about this, like Latinx kind of became like this nomenclature that was like captured all of it. But I do wonder, how much like some other stuff, like, RFK Jr., for instance, pushing holistic, natural, organic, like, did that resonate? What are some of the other elements that pushed Latinos broadly towards Trump and that MAGA world?
Well, we can and should talk about all of those, but what I really want listeners and viewers to understand is overwhelmingly, this was about affordability, cost of living,
Mm,
economic pocketbook issues.
okay.
Overwhelmingly, numbers I've never seen before. And this is what's really most interesting about it. Normally, when people say that there's a problem or a challenge with the economy, it's a jobs message. We need jobs. Jobs actually tested and has been consistently testing at the lower range, in some polls, the
Really?
lowest concern. Everybody has a job. The problem is none of their jobs can afford living here. The cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of energy, the cost of eggs, people have kind of dismissed that. That's a very, very real thing. And as a result, what they're doing is they're voting in a very reactionary way against whoever is in power. So let's talk specifically about New York City, for example. This race that we just had, this primary
Yeah.
where Latino precincts now broke for a Democratic Socialist, when
Yeah.
7 months ago, they broke for Donald Trump. And 4 years before that, they voted for conservative Democrat, at least on paper, Eric Adams. Right? So this is telling us something. And what it's
Mm,
telling us is these
mm,
cultural issues, while obviously there, that's not what's driving this voter at all. What's
mm.
driving it is bread and butter pocketbook economic issues. It's rent, it's mortgages, it's cost of gas, it's cost of living. And until there are some of these more populist measures, Donald Trump's no tax on tips, or
Yeah.
no tax on social security, or uh, Mamdi's, free buses, rent freeze,
Yeah.
community grocery stores. Like that's a very populist, real thing for working class people to latch onto, and it defies right or left politics. It's far, far more populist, Tom, than people realize. Is there's
Interesting.
this sense that Latinos are really more conservative and Republicans are tapping into that. There's very
Mm,
little polling data showing Latinos are becoming more conservative. There's overwhelming data showing Latinos are becoming more populist, rejecting both parties, rejecting the
oh,
ideologies, and voting really centrally on pocketbook issues.
wow. I mean, the way, it's so many ways we could go with this. I'm laughing in part because, we're talking about a block of, effectively, it sounds like swing voters, the way that we used to talk about soccer moms and Panera moms.
That's it. That's exactly
Wow.
what this is. Yeah, and by the way, this is one of the very few blocks that is actually moving. Uh,
Mm,
Latinos are one of the few in this hyper polarized era. You're
wow.
seeing these massive swings, right? Like Trump picked up 12 points of Latinos. Nobody moved 12 percentage points in this election. No one's moved 12 points in a decade, right? And
Yeah.
yet that's what's happened. And then 7 months later, it moves back to a Democratic Socialist. So the question was just asked in the queue: didn't Kamala Harris have a populist
Yeah.
economic agenda? I mean, you could argue that she did, but the
Mm,
much, much more pervasive sense was the
yeah.
Biden economy. The Biden economy with inflationary pressures, and you can bl- blame Trump, blame whoever you want to. These voters were looking at it saying things are quantifiably worse under Biden Harris from an economic perspective than they were under Trump.
Wow.
quantifiable. Interest rates tripled. Inflationary pressures devalued their purchasing power by 20%. Housing continued to skyrocket out of control. All of these things were really creating immense pressures on working class voters. And the fastest part of the working class are these Latino voters.
So would hypothetically then, and you brought this up the last time we were together on air. You said that this the older generations, and of course I should note. I mean, I feel like if you are listening to us, you probably know this already. But for anybody that stumbled in, if you vote in an election, in a federal election, you're a citizen of the United States.
Correct.
This is there are no mystery votes. All right.
Yeah.
I
Right.
don't know if Italian defense light zapped through to some Chinese thermostats and made some whatever made
You
some
sound like
guy
a White House press secretary breaking news right now, suddenly.
right, I know. But I mean, it is worth noting, especially given the propagandizing that we have from decades of this, right? The alleged illegal voting that's out there. Um, but I think it was really fascinating to me because you pointed out, especially for folks that have been here for a few generations, they don't see themselves as immigrants. They're not
Yeah.
Mexican Americans, not Guatemalan Americans. They're not
American.
Panamanians. They're
Yeah.
Americans.
They're typically American. And there is this overemphasis in the Democratic Party right now. I think it's working its way through this, where there is this hyper identification of kind of who you
Mm,
are racially, ethnically. And that is something that does work with a segment of the electorate. It absolutely does.
yeah,
The problem is it's not nearly enough to start building towards a majority. And the bigger problem is for those that have been here 2, 3, 4 generations, which is really where the fast growth of Latino voters
mm,
are, they are increasingly rejecting that identity politics, especially in correlation to the economy. And this is important. When the economy and economic pressures are so significant and people
mm,
keep talking to you through a racial or ethnic lens, it's not that they're offended by it. It's just
yeah.
that they can't relate to it, and they
Oh,
see that your priorities are not theirs.
oh,
Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And so that's really the story of
Wow.
2024 is while Trump was talking populist economics,
Yeah,
uh, the Democratic Party brand broadly had started to over the last 10, 15, 20 years become affiliated with this kind of hyper identity politics. And it's not, again, that people have a visceral reaction against that. It's just not
yeah,
relatable. It's just the Democrats didn't seem relatable. The economy had gotten worse. These issues are very serious, and they're talking about things that aren't top 10 issues out of 10.
yeah. And you have in your most recent piece, and folks, if you're just joining us, I've got Mike Madrid here. You find him on the Substack, The Great Transformation with Mike Madrid. And subscribe. Also, make sure to subscribe right up top there if you're watching us on the app. That little button. Um, uh, you had further down in the piece, and for loyal readers and listeners of 24 Site News, no, I've done quite a bit of reporting on CPAC and Matt Schlapp and his
Yeah.
continued escapades, apparently at farmhouses, rural Virginia, which you can find down. Going over to 24site.news, you can find all of that in the reporting section on the homepage. I was really shocked. I have to tell you, of the many shocking finds in your most recent piece, I'm reading about CPAC down at the bottom. I was like, my God, okay, CPAC,
Well,
CPAC Latino.
CPAC Latino, which is why this is the first year that there is such a thing. And so I
Mm,
got a notice on it because I'm a host of the Latino Vote podcast, and they were looking
yeah.
for media coverage. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm not going to miss this. I will fly. I will fly out from Sacramento to Miami to give you a weekend to see what kind of a clown show this is going to look like." Right?
Is that why you're down in Miami right
The-
now?
yeah, that's why I flew to
Bro,
got in
right
that late last
on.
night. What was that?
Right on, man.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll be live tweeting it. I'll be doing some writing. I'll be doing some bunch of interviews lined up. I think it's going to be a spectacle, but I was like, I'm not going to
Outstanding.
miss this. I am not going to miss this. So one of the stories I'm working on is this contrast between Los Angeles, which is, arguably America's most Latino city, and what's going on with the unrest and federal troops and these horrible
Mm,
crackdowns and the fear of the city, and then coming to Miami, which is arguably another one of the great American Latino cities, which is it's co-hosted by the Latino Wall Street organization, which is going to be just a
mm.
bunch of crypto bros and got rich yesterday in Florida real estate people, all decked out in $10,000 suits doing their CPAC thing, right? So like I want to see this contrast because it really is, I think, emblematic of what the Pew Research poll showed, which is we're at
Mm,
50-50 right now as a Latino community. These
yeah.
differences could not be starker. So I'll be asking a lot, doing some, off the cuff
Wow.
interviews on ICE and illegal immigration
Oh,
questions,
interesting.
talking about Trump and all of that. And so, yeah, I will take the grenade for everybody. I will give a weekend of my life to CPAC Latino. If you're
What?
interested, you can follow me, and you will be getting some of the best hopeful content and information about what's going on over the weekend. But yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah.
I, I have to tell you, I had appointment not viewing this weekend. I had a hard unplug plan for this weekend until you said that, and now I'm going to have to watch this.
Well,
I'm like,
yeah, touch grass a little bit, get out into the real world a little bit, Tom. If anybody deserves that, it's you, because I can't imagine the pace that you're building, what you're building this community. But I do think there's going to be some interesting stuff. Like I said, like there's going to be, some of
wow,
the MAGA world types are going to come down for it. It'll be right here in Miami. I think it's going to be a clown show with a Latino flair. Payasos is a clown. We're gonna see how this comes out. I don't have any expectations. I don't.
who's
It's the first
yeah,
time they're doing it. MAGA world is obviously focused on this. I want to see how sophisticated and organized and structured they are, because that's something to pay attention to also. Because if look, and again,
mm,
if Republicans continue to make these incursions at the pace that they are, this is going to be the most dramatic racial and ethnic realignment in
yeah.
100 years in this country.
It's so surprising to me because this is the same coalition, led by people like Tucker Carlson, who have pushed the discredited and incredibly racist and, I mean, I don't mind saying it, borderline Nazi great replacement theory, quote
Yeah.
unquote, that, that Latinos are replacing whites.
Yes.
Okay. In America. And I would note too, this is a long time thing, right? Because this is, going back to Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly, 2 decades ago. I was so shocked because CPAC sounds like something that Michael Steele would have come up with, 2 decades ago when he was talking about legacy wealth. Well, it's going to be bilingual, all right. But this is the same crowd that 2 decades ago was saying "speak English, MF."
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just astounded by all of it.
I won't. I would not be surprised if I get an interview in Spanish of somebody saying, "Yes, this should be an English only country." like, none of this makes sense. But look,
Wow.
I mean, let me walk through kind of the history of CPAC. CPAC actually started when Reagan's insurgency against Gerald Ford began in the 70s.
Yeah,
CPAC was
totally.
like, no, there's going to be a conservative wing of the Republican Party. We're going to move away from the Rockefeller and Ford Republicans. We're not going to be these moderates anymore. We're going to become this, conservative juggernaut.
Yeah.
CPAC then really morphed. And the last time I went to a CPAC, again, as a Republican, I'm a Lincoln Project Republican, people know that. I went in 2016. Look, I've never
Mm.
gone to CPAC for anything other than to watch a spectacle. Like, I want to see this front row.
Right.
So
Yes.
I went when it was clear that Donald Trump was going to secure the nomination. People don't remember this, but CPAC was the last place fighting Trump. They
Yeah.
hated Trump in the primary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mitt Romney,
Yeah.
spoke to the group saying we can't allow this to happen. The
Yeah.
conservatives, the true conservatives in the party were like, this is the worst thing that
Yeah.
ever happened. This guy's not a conservative. This is not, and this is, and I'm seeing the thing Reagan, the beginning of the end. Let me clarify this.
Mm.
And this may, be
Mm.
shocking to a lot of people. anybody who understands Reagan conservatism
Yeah.
knows that it has nothing to do with Trump republicanism.
Yeah.
Nothing. So people who draw these correlations,
Yeah.
it's maddening because that's not at all what is happening. And if you buy into that, you're never going to understand how this is developed and how to stop it. So
Yeah.
CPAC Latino then becomes this place, presumably, we'll find out this weekend, that is in the middle of these contradictions where Latinos are starting to
Mm.
say, hey, Republicans are saying we're winning the Latino vote, but we don't want Latinos here in the first place. And that's what's really fascinating. That's what to
Mm.
me, that's what's fascinating. And this dichotomy in republicanism, this dichotomy between Latino voters, and why it's working. And those middle class voters that Arlene's talking about, they're
Yeah.
going towards the Republicans faster than any group other than Latinos in the
Wow.
past decade. So these notions that the middle class isn't smart enough to know what it wants, or Latinos
Yeah.
aren't smart enough to know what's good for them. That's the kind of stuff I used to hear in the 80s from Republicans. And you got to be
Wow.
really careful with that rhetoric, because what it means is you are not connecting with the majority of Americans. And that majority of the Americans are saying something, and whether we like it or not, if we don't
Yeah.
listen, things are going to keep getting worse.
I saw and CPAC has really, I remember that the Schlapp when he, took the stage this year,
Yeah.
referred to it as conservative United Nations. And CPAC has always had some measure of a global element to it, but not like it has become in the last 3 years.
No.
And I wonder because I mean they highlight on their page, they highlight Nayib Bukele of El Salvador.
He's going to be
Um,
speaking.
yeah, okay. How much of this is like playing on my ex is Colombian, so I've been introduced extensively to Latino culture in South America, and this, you know, after you had these W and Clinton type characters in some of the presidencies, there's been kind of a reversion in some countries like Colombia, clearly Venezuela, for decades now, to like a ping pong between fascist and socialist strongmen, really, of either side. And Bukele sounds like that. I mean, I'm wondering how much of that is hardwired into the culture, into just an acceptance of that in a way that we, people who've been in America for a long time and are more used to Clintons and Bushes, whatever you might think of them, even Obama and Biden. Certainly not Trump's first term. How much of that is hardwired into the culture and to just a general acceptance that is what a leader looks like.
I reject that notion entirely, and
Okay.
I'll explain why. First of all, let's remember the Democratic Party of New York City just nominated a Democratic Socialist,
Mm,
and Bernie Sanders and AOC, that wing of the Democratic Party, is ascendant,
yep.
and has been for some time. And the reason why I bring that up is because there's a very real likelihood that in 2028 you will have a AOC Bernie type candidate running against a JD Vance candidate. Well, what would that
Mm,
be? What would that be? That would be a socialist running against a fascist,
yeah.
which is exactly what you just
Wow.
said. So this is a global
Yeah.
phenomenon, and that's what we need to look at. It as not like
Yes.
any particular cultural elements to it.
Yeah.
A lot of these third world countries, especially throughout Latin America, where American foreign policy has
Yeah.
been very problematic and very
Yeah.
intrusive and set up regimes and dictatorships for many, many decades, do have dysfunctional democracies.
Yeah.
It's easy to discount that as a cultural phenomenon when it's really our involvement that created that situation in the first place.
Yes. I know.
Right. So what's happening is now a lot of that is coming back to the United States as our democracy is weakening. What is happening is our parties have become extraordinarily weak as
Mm,
philosophical guides to how people should govern. And what you're going to see in that environment is a rise of socialism on the left and of fascism on the
mm,
right. And that's exactly where
wow.
America finds itself today. So in many ways, we should probably look to these countries as a roadmap of what happened and is happening here, as a way to kind of be a
Mm,
better guide to say, rather than it being a cultural proclivity, maybe it was
yeah.
because of the amount of undue influence of foreign money, ours in those case,
Mm,
and bad actors, corporations, and oligarchs manipulating democracy, which is now happening here, and the outcome
yeah.
is exactly the same.
Wow. Coming home to roost, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it's getting bad out
Um,
there, Tom.
I remember about a decade ago, I had a friend out in Indiana who is Chilean, and we were driving and I don't really know much about Chile other than what I know of our involvement in history at that time. Certainly know a lot more now. Certainly with what's going on here,
Right.
and I apologized to him for Pinochet. I was like, "Look, hey man, I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry about Pinochet. I was not born. I was not part of the Nixon administration.
Right.
My last name is not Kissinger. Et cetera." And he's like, "Oh, hi. What are you sorry for?" I'm like, "Oh, the disappearances. I mean, I'm sorry, dude. Like, I'm sorry for broadly speaking for the U.S. involvement in that." He's like, "Oh, well, why?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, what's there to be sorry for?" He loved Pinochet. His whole family
Yeah.
loved Pinochet. He loved how
Yeah.
clean everything looked.
Yeah.
How
So
nice
Bukele.
everything was. Yeah,
Bukele.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of kind of the argument, right? Law and order, right? Let's
mm,
get things all disciplined and structured. We did that, Noriega was our front guy.
mm,
The Dole Food Company was setting
yeah,
up dictators throughout Latin America for years so that we could exploit resources. John, Foster Dulles, it was the right arm as a Secretary of State funding all of these efforts with CIA involvement to make sure that American supporters were propped up to run these countries. So yeah, whenever you have a dysfunctional foundation for your democracy,
mm,
I mean, it's easy to just say, well, it's a cultural proclivity. Maybe that's just the history of their understanding of democracy because that's
mm.
what we
That's what
exported. That's what
yes,
we promulgated. That's what we wanted for them. And so when that's your only reference and understanding, it's to me, it's like that's the historical understanding of what democracy is. That's the way this
yeah.
worked because of our own doing.
It is. It's sad, really.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
horrible.
just really like I and profound, in a way that it's boomeranged back on us, but also too because like I mean, I have friends who, one friend is Chilean whose family had to flee, um, and they go back there and think of the museum of. I mean, I'm getting chills right now. The museum of the disappeared, where they have the silhouettes of everyone. And now, thank God, that's not 100% happening here. Although we certain
90%. There's people disappearing right now in Los
yeah,
Angeles. I mean, what we're witnessing right now is not that different. We have masked federal agents without warrants. Maybe they're bounty hunters. Maybe they're not. A lot of them are not showing their badges as officials.
yeah,
And we're not hearing from a lot of these people. Again, I interviewed Jack Herrera on my Substack, who's doing
mm,
remarkable reporting on this. Do you know what the average detention time is for a United States citizen, a legal, lawful U.S. citizen, is when you're picked up by ICE? Guess how long the average detention time is? U.S. citizen,
it's just more than a week.
18 months.
The-
Because the reason why is because these officers do not have to accept any of your paperwork as legitimate. And who carries their birth certificate with them anyway? By the way, I don't. Right, but like your ID is not proof of citizenship. Your driver's license is not proof of citizenship. You can have a passport, but what if they don't accept your passport? All they have to do is say, "No, we're going to come and hold you, and we're going to verify your documents." Here's what gets really ugly. Because these are not criminal proceedings, you're not entitled to a lawyer. So if you don't have the money to hire a lawyer to again navigate your way through the process to verify your citizenship, you have to wait for some unknown period of time until you can somehow afford a lawyer when you're not working to raise the money to get a lawyer or get out. That's
Holy
happening in
shit.
America today with United States citizens, not undocumented, not permanent residents, not aliens, United States citizens. It's happening right now. Some great reporting in the New Yorker
Jesus.
magazine came out just a couple of weeks ago. And again, what if you don't have contacts with people? What if you don't have a way to interact or have somebody bail you out or pay for it, or maybe you do have family you can reach out to, but they don't have the resources? What do? You sit there. You sit there until the government gets around to verifying whether you are or are not a citizen. They're not going to take the chance of releasing you when they think that they're not sure whether you're a citizen or not because they're not taking your documents as proof. What do you do? Like, how can you prove? I wrote an article on my Substack too, but what the headline was, "Can you prove that you're a U.S. citizen?" I mean, we think you can if you just show the paperwork. People are like, "Oh, okay." But what if an agent, and may not even be a licensed or lawful federal agent, just a bounty hunter, says, "I've got a quota to make. I'm getting paid $500 for every person I round up. I'll just round you up. I don't believe those papers are real. I'll take you to the detention center and let them determine it so I can get my money." And what happens is they get their money, they go to the detention center. Nobody can verify proof of your citizenship. You're not walking to the store with your birth certificate. You may or may not have a license with you when you go down and do it. If you do, that alone is not proof of citizenship. So there's all of these things that you would never imagine are happening in this country. So look, I don't want to equate it to Pinochet and what's
Yeah.
happened in Chile with the disappeared, but people are disappearing. They are being removed. Now, the vast majority of them are not citizens, but it is absolutely the case that citizens are being detained and held for an average of 18 months in the current system, which is extraordinary, extraordinary.
Jesus.
And remember, this was happening before Trump. This has been happening in Republican and Democratic administrations,
Hmm.
but it's off the charts now because the roundups are so big. You can't get to these 3,000 person a day quotas unless you're scooping up a lot of U.S. citizens, and they are.
Jesus. I think back to, and all this is interconnected, and it's so easy to, and I fall into this trap too as much as anybody because drop the bomb on Iran, drop a couple of bombs on Iran in an attempt to take out the nukes, and maybe you did not. So now you just pick the hornet's nest with the nukes, and we don't know. We don't know we don't know if they've been weaponized. All right, we don't know. And it's like it's so easy to focus on that and forget that we have law enforcement, DHS, that refuses to identify itself. We have extremists that dress up as
Yes.
law enforcement and refuse to identify themselves in Minnesota.
Yes.
And also, I saw this one out, and I think is I can't remember in California.
We did.
Um, yeah, and and
Man was
it's
arrested impersonating a law enforcement officer
uh,
to get involved in the action. They want to round up illegals,
Jesus.
round people up. And yeah, we don't know. And again, that's part of why it's unconscionable to me that in 2025 you can have masked federal agents who don't have to show a warrant. Like, I don't understand that. Like, how is that even possible? But here
Yeah,
we are. Here we are. These people covering their faces, doing things in the dark of night, no warrant, just grabbing people, scooping them up, and no due process. And because here's the thing, and I'm not a lawyer on this, so I want to be very
yeah,
careful with what I'm
sure,
saying. But if it's not a criminal charge, how is it a crime when you're crossing the border? Everyone says legal versus illegal, right? If it is a crime, you should be getting due process.
yeah,
If the argument is, well, it's a misdemeanor and or it's a civil action, which is
yeah,
apparently what it is, it's not a criminal action, then is this really about legal versus illegal? And what are we doing? Like, how can there
mm,
possibly be this kind of gray area when there are now 4,000 federal troops in Southern California, essentially supporting, folks hunting people down and scooping up citizens and non-U.S. citizens alike? It's just that it's happening here. All of that what we've learned in history about what's happening in Latin America or in Eastern Bloc countries is very much on its way here, or if not already happening.
I want to give a couple of shout outs here because, this is related. Number one, folks, well, number one, if you're just joining us, I'm Tom Lovianco, editor, co-founder of 24 Site News. Subscribe right up top there. Mike Madrid, find him on Substack at The Great Transformation with Mike Madrid. I want to give a shout out for two more here. And especially since you mentioned Eastern Europe. Number one, I'll say, check out Pablo Manriquez, Migrant Insider. He's been doing some excellent reporting on the ground. Him and Nikolai, his colleague, just incredible. Nikolai traveled down to CPAC in El Salvador. I mean, he was on the ground, and thank God he made it back okay and was not detained for 18 months. Okay. And then the other thing I would say is check out, you can find on 24 Site News, and we'll be having another one of these next week. And I'm sure Mike probably knows him, Trygve Olsen and Reed Galen. We've been doing a series of podcasts on Trygve's 7 rules for fighting autocrats. And Trygve used to work with McCain and pro-democracy forces in the Eastern Bloc countries, doing exactly what everybody here needs to be doing if we enjoy democracy. And I'll tell you, as a journalist protected by the First Amendment, who's read about Maria Ressa among many others, I certainly enjoy democracy, and I very much,
Yeah.
very much like keeping it.
Yeah, let me underscore both of those too. Pablo Manriquez is the only reporter who is writing daily on immigration developments, really breaking some really good,
Yeah.
insightful stuff. Give him a follow, check out his stuff. And Trygve is a friend; he's a personal friend. We worked together on the Lincoln Project. Spent a couple months together on location. The work that he was doing, fighting literal dictators, like going into fascist regimes and organizing people, truly a freedom fighter. So
Yeah.
follow Trygve, follow him here. Make sure you're watching that stuff. This is a dude who's really fought
Yeah.
dictatorial regimes from the inside out. So pay attention to him.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And by the way, for folks who don't know, I mean, you can find this all on 24 Site News too, but Trygve is spelled Try GVE. It's Norwegian. I asked him this last time. I double checked.
Yeah,
Trygve
he's a
Olsen.
great political operative. He's just one
Yeah,
of the guys operatives you want on your side. Trig's a good dude.
he is, man. He's incredible. So it's also astounding to me. And I guess it's amazing to still be shocked by any of it. That's probably a good thing, to
Yeah,
not be numb to these things.
no, that's a great way to put it. Is we've got to be shocked. We've got to be taking action to the extent that you can. Not everybody can be a Trig V and set things aside and go
Yeah,
hunt dictators, but you can be vocal. You can express support. You can build community because in times like this, the fear is the point. Terror is
yeah,
the point. Is what it
right.
does is fear and terror has a way of kind of immobilizing people and frightening them
Yeah,
into submission. The more you are voicing that this is not normal, that this is not okay, the more that you're highlighting examples of these egregious acts, the more you start to see it drop and a decline in public support. And people go, what
yes,
does it matter if the polls are dropping? There's no elections coming up. It matters immeasurably because usually when a fascist or dictatorial regime succeeds, they're at like 65, 75% support levels with the public. The public wants this to keep going. Trump is at his lowest historical range right now. Okay. So keep in
yeah,
mind, he's in, very rarely, and I've tracked Donald Trump's approval ratings from day one. Very
mm,
rarely does he drop below 40%. He's sitting at a 38 to 40% range right
wow,
now. Okay.
wow,
Heading into what's likely going to be a recession. Cost of living is not getting better. Middle East is no one knows what the hell's going on there. There's a whole lot that's going on that gives us, I think, a lot more room for downside for Trump support levels.
yeah,
If Democrats take at least one house in the midterms, everything changes. The whole world changes. So be resilient. Don't stick
yeah,
with community. Stick with like-minded people.
yes.
Don't be quiet. If you're quiet today, it's going to be harder to be louder tomorrow.
Yeah. I forget where this is a few months ago, and I forget who I was talking with. It might have been here on Substack Live, might have been on the TV or radio. I can't remember exactly. But, somebody brought up about Elon Musk and why does it even matter that he's unpopular? And that was in the middle of the Doge attack,
Yeah,
and, back in, like, February, early March. And I did I made the argument that, among other things, it does matter because, I mean, clearly he's as narcissistic as Trump, and, is concerned about these things, and lo and behold, he disappears, all right? Or,
because he
I
was
mean, his most
unpopular. Yeah.
yeah.
And that's so, yes, of course it matters. It does matter, especially to somebody who is as, prone to public sentiment as Donald Trump is. I mean, he's very good about creating his own reality and he believes it. Like he
Yeah,
genuinely, at some level, he genuinely believes that there were a million, undocumented people voting against him in California, and that's how he lost. I mean, it's just nuts. But that is the mentality. That's
yeah,
what he believes. He does pay attention to, as somebody who worked on the Lincoln Project, as somebody who's attacking him every day.
mm,
You can see it today when bad coverage comes out about CNN gets a leaked memo, classified memo
yeah,
saying, "Hey, maybe we didn't damage these sites as
yeah,
much as we thought," and he just goes nuts, pushes Pete
yeah.
Hegseth out there, go shut this down, right? And then Hegseth makes a fool of
Basically,
himself. Like this, that is one of the things that can keep us going. It did during the last presidency, by the way.
yeah,
Is the more public pressure stays on him, the more
mhm,
erratic he and less focused he becomes, which leads more people to realize I can't support this guy anymore. Now it's terribly dangerous and scary as somebody who's living in a country with a nuclear arsenal and the
yeah.
awesome power of the federal government realizing this guy's in the cockpit flying, but the alternative is worse, right? You've got to be able to stand up there and say, the emperor has no clothes here. We
Yeah.
can't support this. This is not who we are. Now is the time to be voicing that, folks.
You can and I mean, as you said, you can really see it in his reactions to things.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, he's the same person that, 10 years ago, ran in the first, 2016 Republican primary. Um, Reminds me of when he got scared by Ben Carson.
There,
Imagine being scared by Ben Carson, right?
well
Because of
put.
what right?
Yeah.
And you can see, the first person he attacked, back then was Rand Paul. Why? Because Rand Paul had the nationalist, foreign policy, which he wanted to hold. So he beats the hell out of him in that first debate. And, I think to this most recent election when, he's like, well, we're not going to talk about Project 2025. Anybody who's talking about Project 2025 is a liar. And here we have Project 2025.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, he is incredibly responsive to these things. The way he's talking about Medicaid right now inside the quote, big, beautiful bill. All right. Trying to say that, oh, no, nothing's going to happen with that. Well, okay. That's clearly the weak point there.
Yeah.
Like,
And there you go. That's exactly right. When he responds, what he responds to is the weak point, and where you need to drive, 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 drive. And stay focused to the extent that you can. I mean, the eternal conundrum here strategically is, do you chase down every rabbit hole where he's going? Right?
yeah.
Because there's 10 news stories a day. Now, there are a lot of people who believe that this is done by design. Anybody who has worked in politics or government anywhere near that level realizes there's nobody that's 20% as disciplined to run that many media drills at one time. It is just not possible.
Yeah.
This is not orchestrated. This is just chaos. This is just who they
Yeah.
are. And so,
Yeah.
you know, to believe he's playing four-dimensional chess, you have to really have drank a lot of the Kool-Aid
Yeah.
because he's
Mm,
not. He's demonstrably not. This is just catch as catch can. This is policy making by fiat. It's whatever he thinks at whatever
right.
time and whatever he changes. That's what's so dangerous about the phenomenon is because I've got longtime friends, people that very educated, very informed, that worked in Republican politics for 30, 35 years, who will
Yeah.
blindly say what he's doing on tariffs is a good thing. And it's like, well, tell me what he's doing on tariffs. They don't even have an answer because it changes hour by hour, minute by minute, day by
Mm,
day. Same thing with what's happening with bombing in the Middle East. Like these are very consequential actions, but there
yeah.
is no rhyme or reason other than this man who decides he hasn't had a cup of coffee in the morning, so he's a little bit pissed off, or what else is going on.
I'm sure I'm going to say Haley Barbour. I'm going to screw this up. It sounds like something Haley Barbour would have said. Any old ass can kick down a barn. All right, and that's kind of what this feels like.
Yeah.
And it serves their purpose, right? That to have that complete impulsive ADD. You know, Netanyahu's in his ear 1 minute, and he's like, "All right, let, let's go fly the bunker busters." All
Well, and he
right.
loves that. He loves that sense of control he gets when everything is out of
Mm,
control. That's the way he
yeah.
controls everything. When he determines everything, the only thing that opposes that is a disciplined opposition. The more it's
Mm,
off kilter, the more he's in
yeah.
control. And so, yeah, chaos is the environment that he works in. I think he believes it's a good negotiating tactic, because
Yeah.
in many ways, this is actually exactly the way developers negotiate deals. When you're negotiating with the government on a real estate deal,
Yeah.
you have to ask for the moon, knowing you only want this.
Oh,
You come all the way out
yeah.
here and create chaos. This is real. I'm serious.
Yes, that's
That's the
right.
way
I
to
know you're right.
negotiate. Yeah,
Yes.
and so
I,
he uses these tactics. Except the difference is you're not trying to buy, a lot to build a tower in Midtown Manhattan. You're dealing with a nuclear arsenal. You're dealing with, the
yeah.
financial markets that determine billions and trillions of dollars of wealth based off of what you say is the most powerful man in the world.
I'm laughing because when I was a cover reporter at the Frederick News Post 23, what was that, 2002, 23 years ago. And I went to a county zoning
Yeah,
meeting, and I used to cover. I was the fill-in guy, right? So I'd sit through these things. I know shit from Shinola back then, and I remember sitting there through one of these things, and I also couldn't have told. I mean, good thing we had real reporters to help me out. Couldn't have told you what the hell was going on with any of these ordinances, but I did bring back paper, so that helped.
right.
I was sitting through one of these county zoning meetings, and I remember looking it over at one of the other reporters, and I'm like, "Who the fuck are all these people with the golf shirts?" And he's like, "Oh, those don't you know? Like those are the developers. They run this place."
That's exactly right. Yeah. And the way the developer works is because of those ordinances. And I'm glad, look, I've done a lot of local government work myself. When you've worked with
Mm,
developers, when you've worked with real estate developers, you understand
mm,
the negotiating tactic is you have to ask for triple of what you want to get a third of what you want. And
mm.
that's the negotiating process, ratchets down. If you understand that about Trump, you start to see his style on everything. And yeah,
Yes.
it's horrible for government. It's absolutely a
Yeah.
horrible way to run a government. That's why, you know, we, we've needed calming influences, rational influences around this guy. But they never succeed anyway because he's always
Yeah.
he's always in his view might viewed himself as a success when the chaos reigns. Because if he's the
Mm,
point, if he's the decision maker, the slower he is to make decisions, the more opposition mounts to what he's doing. So
yes.
his goal is to continually be on offense, even if it's
Yes.
ridiculous in his own mind, especially when it's ridiculous in everybody
Yeah.
else's mind. You saw this in front of the press corps in Europe at NATO. They're like,
Yeah.
what is this? Who is this guy? Is this a real thing going on or is this a performance? They'd never dealt with him as a press before.
Yeah.
So the tactic is to continually drive more and more and more, understanding that there's going to be a negotiation point that will come down and get something else done. And it's a horrible way to be in charge of the free world, especially when you can rattle
Yeah.
markets, especially when you can, cause
Yeah.
conflict that kills people. Very, very dangerous.
It's been a few months since I said this, which means I need to say this again. And I say this repeatedly. Everybody, if you have not read Maggie Haberman's biography of Trump, please do. Don't confidence, man. I mean, and she'll be the first to acknowledge how much this builds on the great reporting of tab reporters, alt weekly reporters, of years of decades past in New York. And of course, her own expertise and understanding is she still is the greatest Trump reporter. And I know a lot of folks on the left don't like, they really don't like Maggie, but uh, it's not for a reporter to say what should be. It's for a reporter, and she is the best at it by far. And her book, Confidence, man, reveals so much. And when you understand who he is, that's what I'm thinking about here. Mike, how did you get involved in politics, man? How did you get your start?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a family, good, lower middle class, which is kind of the genteel way of saying we were poor. Mexican Mexican American
Hmm.
Catholic Democrat family.
Oh,
And my parents were never politically involved, but they were very politically aware. And so
hmm.
conversations about politics and history were every night the family debated, which is probably a kind term. We argued over dinner about what was going on, and that was encouraged because we were taught that
Oh,
being a citizen of the world and aware of the world was something to be valued. And I think that was where I learned my love of politics. And like I said, my parents were never politically involved, but they were very politically aware. I've just always been passionate about it. I think a lot of it comes from my own um,
you know,
upbringing, my Catholic tradition, fighting for the underdog, looking out for the least among us. And I don't have much appetite for partisan politics anymore. I have no appetite for it. I just think both
y-
sides are completely dysfunctional. But
yeah, and
there's
it's
clearly one side that's very
clearly
dangerous at the moment.
reflected in voter sentiment.
Yeah,
I think you mentioned Catholic, and you did your research. You started your live research at the premier Jesuit institution, Georgetown. Right? Is that correct?
I am Jesuit educated. Yeah, a lot that makes a lot of sense when people are like, "Oh, okay, now I understand Mike Madrid." It's like if you understand a Jesuit education, I'm probably the perfect embodiment of it. But yeah, Georgetown is the oldest Catholic university in North America, the United States.
Hmm.
It was established, to kind of be an alternative when Catholics weren't allowed into the Ivies. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
and yeah, so there's a history there. It's a beautiful history. It's a very unique history, but
Yeah.
it's very Jesuits too. It's very different than Notre Dame,
Mm,
as some of the
yeah.
Midwesterners would say. Um, but it's very very different educational traditions, and proud of my Jesuit education. I hope the old Jesuits are making them proud.
It
Um,
shines, baby. It shines through. It does,
yeah,
man. Um,
thanks. I appreciate that.
yeah, man. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. Guys, I'm Tom Lobianco, editor, co-founder of 24 Site News. That's Mike Madrid. Depending upon how you're viewing this, if you're viewing this live, he's right here. If you're viewing it when I post it on YouTube, he's either over here or over there. I can't remember all his videos shift. But he's here. All right.
I'm here.
And and if you're watching this, you need to check out the Great Transformation with Mike Madrid. Find him on all the socials. You're still on Twitter, right? You still do
Very
the
much. Yeah, I'm still there.
yeah.
Yeah, trying to weed
So
myself off, but I can't get out of it.
I know what addiction. It just uh,
Yeah.
Mike Madrid is going to be martyring himself for all of us at CPAC Latino the weekend down in Miami. So I'll be tuning in. Um, who was that clown in the '70s that was real popular in Latin America? Or the Bumblebee is that the one?
Oh,
I can't
oh,
remember.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know who the bumblebee. I'm sorry, it escapes me. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. We'll put a link down below. Chapulín, Colorado.
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Oh my
Chapulín.
God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's funny. That's a great reference. That's big extra points for you, man. A+ on that one. That's big. That's a good pull. But
If
I will be there live tweeting, live sharing what's going on, interviews and stuff, so that you don't have to. If you do need a break from the craziness, do so. I think it's gonna be more entertaining than anything else. But I will be. I flew into Miami to cover CPAC Latino, the first ever here, and we'll see how it goes. Tom, if I don't appear on Monday, send in the troops. You'll know where to find my body in this general area. But I don't know how I
oh,
will be received there, but we'll find out.
They reached out to you, man. I mean, that's a telling of the staff work these days.
Right, right, right.
All right, guys, and for anybody, if you got anybody who missed this, couldn't make it, you find it. I'll be publishing it over 24 Site News shortly. All right, y'all. Have a good weekend. Stay sane. Touch grass, and we'll see you on Monday. Peace.
Thanks so.